Thanks, Manna. Well, I too am a refugee from Queensland. Like Amanda and Shailene, and like John, I'm a long-term resident of Canberra. We'll have to see who's been here the longest. So I'm a supporter of the Raiders and the Broncos, and of course Queanbeyan in the state of origin. But even more important, my daughter, who's only lived in the ACT her whole life, is a supporter of Queensland.
That's called as genes, right?
That's right. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Around the world, between 2001 and 2005, 6 house prices, or around the Western world anyway, except in Germany, which was trying to assimilate East Germany, and a little bit in Switzerland, where you need to find some way of working there for about 11 years before they'll let you in. House prices rose dramatically, effectively doubled. And in 2006 the government formed the Affordable Housing Task Force, and there were 2 of them, and they reported in 2007. And as people have pointed out, in around about 2001 you could get into the housing market by buying a house for about $120,000 on an income of about $27,000, and by 2005-06 you'd be forced to buy a house of around about $225,000–250,000, and you wouldn't have much choice. You'd be at the fringes of the city, and so you'd need a $60,000 to $70,000 income, and so about 30% of households found it far more difficult, but to some extent pushed into stress or into the rental market. I might say that I can remember when we bought a house in Canberra, I had $8 a week to live on after we'd paid for our prices, and I guess that it had an impact on my wife, who's an ex-CSIRO scientist. So we now have solar hot water, photovoltaics, triple glazing, and our household running expenses are fairly low, but it's a very difficult stage of life, I certainly acknowledge. The government responded to the report by introducing a large number of initiatives, public housing initiatives, community housing, the $50 million revolving loan to Community Housing Canberra, and also giving them at market price sites for 120 dwellings a year, and they're doing successively there to multi-unit developments. Have been the largest in Australia for a community housing development and company. They've got a wide range of housing now underway, and essentially they sell about half of it and keep about half of it for rental. Land supply, as John has said, has been, and Peter, has been ramped up dramatically. I think 3 years before the report, as Peter said, there were about 3,300 units released, and 3 years after about 12,000, and in the program at the moment, over 4 years, we're proposing to release 17,000 sites, and we're even looking at ramping that up. It takes about 2 years after that for the dwellings to commence, and we're now seeing in the 2 years to 2010, commencements were up 96%, and so I guess I'd say that like the Broncos in Queensland, the affordable housing program isn't perfect, but some of the stats show that it's better than the alternatives. We're up 96%. The next best was Victoria, which was up 31%, and Queensland went backwards by 22.5%. So in terms of those performances, we were going fairly well. And of course, the National Housing Supply Council says we should be doing about 2,500 a year. And this year we're aiming to put out 5,000. This is the longest upswing in demand that I'm aware of in the ACT's history. I suppose it was caused by an easing of interest rates, Commonwealth employment in the later years of the Howard government being increased by 5,000 and then I think 7,000. The GFC, global financial crisis, had a limited downside for Canberra, in as much as there wasn't loss of employment. And the upside demand pressures were the dramatic drop in interest rates, the dramatic drop in international migration, mainly with expats returning home. If you look at the international figures, they went up from about 280,000 to about 460,000, and I think about 430,000 the next year. So there was this dramatic upsurge, and in fact the ABS ramped up its forecast growth rate for Canberra from 1.2% up to 1.9%, so a 50% increase. And I guess their forecasting power is far in excess of ours. So to some extent, we were jumping in response to that with, of course, a 2-year lag rate. The First Home Owners Boost also added to that. NRAS, the National Rental Affordability Scheme, which was a great scheme introduced by the Commonwealth. We were able to get 6%. Some of those were the housing at student accommodation, but 6%, and yet our population share is 1.6%. The Housing Affordability Fund, which is still producing some reductions in price in Gungahlin, and of course the stimulus response, where we got, I think, allocated about 300 houses, but we're able to turn them using the sorts of techniques that Peter's talking about. For the private sector, we used community facility land. The ACT put in the land and used the Commonwealth money just for housing, and so we were able to produce about 500 as opposed to an allocation of a bit over 300, as and I'm going from memory on that. Of course, then the Hawke report provided a focus on organisational integration and collaboration, and some cutting of red tape. The innovative products, land rent, we've talked about, and I'm sorry, I misunderstood the communication, so I did have a few slides to essentially show that with the land rent product, you can land rent the block, you own it, but you pay for it as if it was rent, and then get a loan from CPS, and you can essentially move to paying off your house for about, with interest rates a little high now, it's slightly more than what you would pay as rent for the same house and land package. And once you've paid off the house, of course, you're only paying rent on the land, which definitely should be cheaper than the rent for house and land. And we are looking, it's fairly difficult, but we're looking at how we can get a land rent package for an organisation like CHC, but we wouldn't keep it for CHC. It might be able to be used by Peter's scheme as well for medium density housing. That'll require legislative change, but that's under investigation. We can do better, but I guess with release rates of 3 times what they of the next best, twice the average need. So it's that pressure of pent-up demand with innovative products, with greater social housing and improved processes. I think also working with stakeholders in the community, we'll continue to strive to see what we can do to keep housing as affordable as possible in Canberra.